Hello, my name's Alice Swain and I'm the officer at the Salvation Army in Mould. Now, last year I published a book called Flourishing in the Wilderness, and I want to read to you a chapter today that I think is really relevant to where we are at the moment. It's chapter 1 and it's entitled Flourishing in the Wilderness. Ezekiel 47 verse 9 says, "Life will flourish wherever this water flows." Throughout the Bible, there's a lot of imagery of the wilderness. In the Old Testament, we see the people of Israel spending 40 years in the wilderness while waiting to enter the Promised Land. In the New Testament, we see Jesus go into the wilderness where he's tempted by the devil. In the Scriptures, the wilderness is not just used to picture a physical environment, but is often a metaphor for our spiritual and emotional health. The 40 years that the people of Israel spent in the desert was a time of discipline, where they were broken to understand the submission to God, and they were encouraged to rely on God and not on themselves. For Jesus, his time in the wilderness was a time of great trial and suffering in preparation for the sacrifice ahead. While on pilgrimage to Israel, I was able to experience firsthand what the wilderness actually looks and feels like. It was hot, arid, and desolate. There was simply mile after mile of nothing but barrenness. As I stood in the intense heat of the midday sun, I started to realise what it really meant to picture wilderness. For us as Christians, we can sometimes feel as if we're stuck in a wilderness, bleak and desolate, with no hope for miles around. Reading the book of Kings, we see the prophet Elijah was not a stranger to being in the wilderness, spiritually as well as physically. 1 Kings 19 verse 4 says, "Then he went on alone into the wilderness, travelling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. 'I've had enough, Lord,' he said. 'Take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors who've already died.'" Elijah had done mighty things for God. He'd just had a real mountaintop experience. However, his wilderness mindset overtook him, and he could see no goodness ahead. But throughout the chapter, we see how God was there with him all along, even if he couldn't feel it. The angels brought him food and drink and led him to a place of shelter. Then he had a beautiful experience of God, where God draws close to him in the still of the wilderness. He followed God's instructions, even though it meant returning to the wilderness, and God blessed him. Alongside the barren imagery of the wilderness, we often see rich imagery of the wilderness giving way to a flourishing and fertile land. Very often the promise of God and his goodness is pictured as fruit growing in a barren land. Isaiah 43 verse 19 says, "Look, I'm about to do something new. Even now it's coming. Do you not see it? Indeed, I will make a way in the wilderness, rivers in the desert." An encounter with God can cause a barren wilderness to become a flourishing place, where the water of life flows and ensures God's goodness is seen. When we allow the life-giving water to flow in our hearts, we can become physically and spiritually like the person in Psalm 1. "Blessed is the one who delights in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither." When we face difficult times in our lives, be it infertility, illness, divorce, even the coronavirus, or whatever it might be, we can often feel our lives are arid and desolate. We seem to be utterly alone, as if we're in the wilderness. There have been times in my own journey of infertility when I felt as if I was stuck in the wilderness. Like the children of Israel, the journey I walked into motherhood, which I believed would only take a short while, seemed to go on forever. At times I felt abandoned by God and alone in my suffering. However, God wants to say to us all today, the desert and the parched lands will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. Isaiah 35 verse 1 to 2. We can all flourish in whatever wilderness we may face. What's more, God wants to help us to be fruitful, even if the landscape around us seems barren. The key to our flourishing is to draw close to God and spend time with Him in His Word. When we come to God and allow His living water to flow through the dry places, we can flourish and grow in Him. Jeremiah 17 paints a beautiful picture. It's a picture that shows how we can flourish in the wilderness and have the strength to bear fruit even through the trials and difficulties that life can throw at us. Jeremiah 17 verse 7 to 8 says, "But blessed is the man who trusts me, God, the woman who sticks with God. They're like trees replanted in Eden, putting down roots near the rivers, never a worry through the hottest of summers, never dropping a leaf, are serene and calm through droughts, bearing fresh fruit in every season." Albert Osborne in the songbook wrote a beautiful song, 742. "When shall I come to the healing waters? Lifting my heart, I cry to thee my prayer. Spirit of peace, my comforter and healer, in whom my springs are found, let my soul meet thee there. Wash from my hands the dust of earthly striving, take from my mind the stress of secret fear. Cleanse thou the wounds from all but thee far hidden, and when the waters flow, let my healing appear. Light, life and love are in that healing fountain, all I require to cleanse me and restore. Flow through my soul, redeem its desert places, and make a garden there for the Lord I adore. From a hill I know healing waters flow. O rise, Emmanuel's tide, and my soul overflow." God bless.